My name is Khawla Jaber. I'm a Palestinian origin, born in Kuwait and lived in Jordan. As I stand before you today, I'm reminded of the deep-rooted strength and resilience that flows through the veins of every Palestinian, generation after generation. In the face of adversity, we do not back down. We do not yield. We rise! Time and time again, fueled by the legacy of our ancestors, guided by the steadfast resolve of our future, and shaped by the unwavering strength of Palestinian women.
Mutual, la, mutual, la. This is the Mutual Broadcasting
What we are witnessing is the exposure of lies, that colonization is neither benevolent or non-violent.
To understand the resistance would be to understand settler colonialism, for which mainstream media is intimately entwined with the state in this country.
Everything we do here, everything we do is brilliant.
Our liberation will never be found in states, in governments, in courts, but it will be found in each other.
You're listening to the Justice for Palestine podcast.
This podcast is produced on the unceded lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people by the Radio Reversal Collective.
In this podcast, we're aiming to create a living archive of the movement for Palestinian liberation in this city and the work that organisers, activists, artists, academics, workers, parents and everyday people are doing to challenge the genocidal project of the Israeli government.
This is a series built out of the urgent need to respond to this political moment.
Don't expect slick production or finely crafted narratives. This is the sound of a movement in progress. Messy, sweat-slicked summer protests, community meetings in overpacked trades halls, debates about strategy, sustainability, and what we can do next.
In every episode, you can hear the sound of grief and rage, anguish and anger, every scream, every drumbeat.
This is an archive of a local resistance movement, a collective struggle grounded in this settler colonial city, aiming at nothing short of liberation for all Indigenous people everywhere.
For all oppressed peoples everywhere.
For everyone struggling against coercion, incarceration, exploitation and occupation.
We are witnessing a time of unthinkable violence. We are watching genocide unfold through our phone screens.
We are screaming into the void.
And we're watching as settler colonial nations around the world stand in solidarity with the genocidal colonial project of Israel.
And yet, on the streets
and in parks
and in classrooms
and around dinner tables
across the world, we see a collective understanding being forged.
We see the power of Indigenous people standing in their sovereignty, coming together to challenge colonial narratives wherever they take root.
We are watching as the violence of colonisation is laid bare, the curtain pulled back.
So join us as we learn from the movements that are taking root in this place and time.
In each episode, you'll hear a chorus of voices, particularly Palestinian organisers and activists who've been sharing their grief, rage, sovereignty and struggle through the microphone each week.
And teaching us what it is to resist and refuse violence
with everything we've got.
For details of who's speaking in each episode, as well as transcript, you can head to the Radio Reversal Substack and check the podcast notes for each show. My name's Anna, and you're going to be hearing my voice quite a lot over the course of this series. I'm a white settler, a radio producer, researcher, illustrator and writer based here in so-called Brisbane, and one of the organisers with both the Justice for Palestine Magunjan crew and the Radio Reversal Collective. We're releasing this podcast on Sunday the 10th of March, 155 days since October 7. This is insurgent journalist and First Nations organiser Nick, offering us the harrowing facts about where we are as of today.
So right now, as of today, at least 30,800 Palestinians have been killed and 72,198 wounded in Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7th. Yet the death toll in Israel from the October attacks stands at less than 1,100.
So, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen, on the news and things, so I won't go into too much detail, but, I mean, Israel are not only indiscriminately carpet bombing civilian areas, but they are actively targeting schools, hospitals, especially. Not a single hospital in Gaza is functional anymore. So basically, everyone who is wounded... basically the hospitals are now pretty much just first aid stations. They can't do operations, they can't do anything. So a lot of people are dying of wounds that are very easily treated in normal circumstances, and this is very deliberately done by Israel as well. They very actively have cut off power. They've completely cut off food as well from Gaza, so people are starving. They've cut off water, so there's next to no clean water essentially. So this is a genocide, basically. But on top of that, I think what has been a bit less publicized is that they're actively expelling Palestinians as well, and hiding it under this idea of letting civilians get to safety. So first they said, okay, Hamas are running operations out of the north, so all Palestinians in the north of Gaza have to go to the south, which was apparently, some kind of safe zone. On the way there, they were bombed. All of the places that they said they were safe were not safe. They were bombed. They've now basically more or less, reconquered the north, and now they've just begun telling people in South Gaza that they have to flee.
This is Palestinian academic, writer and organizer Dr. Jamal Nabulsi.
Basically, the Israeli occupation forces have been slowly driving the Palestinians of Gaza further and further south and cornering them into a tiny piece of land, which is now, it's the most densely populated area on the earth now. And they're poised now to I mean, they've already been bombing that area, absolutely. They've been bombing the north, the south, everywhere. They declare safe zones and then they bomb them. But they're poised to continue their ground invasion through to Rafah in the south, and to essentially their fundamental goal is, and it has been from the very beginning, to drive the Palestinians of Gaza completely out of their homes and completely off their land. And that's almost 2.5 million people, just about exactly the same as the population of Meganjin, Brisbane. So it's as if this entire city is ethnically cleansed, depopulated.
Behind these harrowing numbers are the stories of everyday people in Palestine experiencing the horror of Israel's genocidal violence. Here, Palestinian organiser and activist Tidea invites us to understand the human scale of the violence being inflicted in this moment, and particularly the use of starvation as a tool of genocide.
I want you to close your eyes for a brief moment as we begin a visualization. You are a 28-year-old mother of 3 beautiful children. Zena, who is 7 years old, Malak, that turns 3 in a couple of days, and Saleh, whom you still carry in your arms. Your relatives are either displaced in the shelter or potentially deceased, and you haven't been able to locate them since Israel cut off all the electricity in early October last year, and your phones were no longer in use. Your husband, Walid, has been missing for a week, and you have been informed of his death this cold winter morning as his body parts were found amongst the rubble. There is no time to grieve. In a matter of 3 weeks, you have relocated from the north of Gaza to central Gaza, to Deir al-Balah, to Khan Yunis, and now to Rafah. Your situation has gotten harder without the support of your husband, who would try his best to gather a few bites to eat for you and your children at the end of each day. You faintly hear the sound of your children laughing as they make their way back to the tent that you reside in, hoping to have something to eat after playing outside all day. So you boil unclean water to convince them that they will be eating something tonight. The sun has now set and it is dark in the tent. You caress your children to sleep, promising to wake them up when dinner is ready, hoping that they will sleep off their hunger and you won't have to bear the words, "We have no food." Your children ask about their father and you are not ready to give them the news. So you tell them he's helping out at the local hospital that a child of age would know doesn't exist anymore. You are no longer able to produce milk to breastfeed your baby who is 5 months old, and you are beginning to lose hope. Where is the world, you think to yourself, as you close your eyes and rest your head on the hard rubble ground near your children, holding them close to you in case you are attacked, you die together. The sound of military planes buzzing and the hardness of the ground makes it impossible to sleep, but you eventually fade into a deep serenity. This is the average experience for many women and children in Gaza. Do we have to convince the world that Palestinian mothers are like any other mother in the world? Until when do we have to convince the world that Palestinian children are just like other children in this world? Until when do we have to convince the world that Palestinian men are not terrorists and do not deserve to be dehumanized? Enough is enough. Remember that when we march these streets, we do it wholeheartedly and with full conviction that human life is worth preserving. And people like the Walid family are worth fighting for.
The Zionist occupiers of my homeland have explicitly declared their intent to commit genocide against my kin in Gaza. In the last days, they have indiscriminately bombed the Gaza Strip with that intent in mind. Colonization is nothing new for my people, but the scale of the current massacre is genocidal. The media paints us as the savages in our resistance, yet it is the Palestinian babies and children being pulled from the rubble of collapsed residential buildings. We see the use of internationally outlawed for use in civilian areas, white phosphorus used against a 2 million large population that is half children. So don't you dare speak to me of savagery. It's the colonizers who invented savagery. It's the colonizers who sowed the seeds of violence. I just pray one day Palestinian love will be allowed to freely grow, and pray my future children can play amongst the olive groves I've never known. The promise of such a future is rooted in our resistance now. Free, free Palestine!
Free, free Palestine! We are in pain like never before, our hearts battered but our wills not broken. It's hard to express this emotion, so let me start with a plea, a request. Ya Rabbi, strengthen our chest so that our collective voices liberate the oppressed. Ya Rabbi, untie the knots in our tongues so our words bring down the unjust. Ya Rabbi, allow us to contain this anger so we persist like the fathers of Palestine. Ya Rabbi, give us the courage to stand firm like the mothers of Palestine. Ya Rabbi, ease this pain so that we remain resilient for the children of Palestine.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Gaza!
That was Palestinian community organiser Zaid Nabulsi and Binil Mohidin from Queensland Muslim Incorporated. In addition to the use of starvation against the Palestinian people, we've also seen the destruction of the health system in Gaza. This is Dr. Muntasir, a medical doctor trained in Gaza, speaking about the horrors he's watching his colleagues and friends endure as the health system fails.
I'd like to tell you my little story, and it applies to a lot of Palestinians. I grew up in the West Bank, in the North West Bank in Tul Karam. I was shot when I was 12 years old. An innocent kid going back home from school to try and see, very eager to know what my mom has cooked for lunch. For an Israeli occupation force sniper to shoot me in my neck, and I still hold the bullet in my shoulder. It's being left as a souvenir. I lost the use of my arm for 6 months. So I feel with all those people, thousands of children now in Gaza and in the West Bank are left incapacitated or left with lots of disabilities that they can never heal. We survived, and I was asking myself at that time, what have I done to this enemy? I've done nothing wrong. I'm only a 12-year-old child. And the other day when I saw the video of a kid who was asking the paramedics, will I live? I remembered myself at that time. I remembered how I felt. But there is no mercy. And I thought as the time comes, as all Palestinians, we pull ourselves from the ashes and we keep fighting. And then I went to the medical school where there was no medical school before we joined. We spent 7 hard years with the occupation trying to make our life hard at each and every station. We studied medicine and trained to be the first 21 doctors to graduate there. They built the wall. We were struggling to get to our hospitals. We were struggling to get to our exams. Yet they were pulled through, and we passed and we became doctors. And as fate happens, I became a doctor as an intern doctor at the hospital I was taken to when I was a child, when I was shot, and was working there like all Palestinian doctors with very limited resources, with sudden large amount of injured patients rushed from the F-16 bombardments and from the Apache attacks. And at that time, you'll get 60 or 70 people running a very tiny hospital into the hospital, and you have to look for those who are silent because those who are the ones who are dying. And you're trying to help everyone as much as you can, but you feel helpless. You don't have enough equipment. You run out of sterile things very quickly. So when I feel the despair of my colleagues now in Gaza, I remember every moment of those moments when we train and spend all their time wanting to help others, but we're helpless. We need help at that moment. And I can't understand how the world can stand and watch this massacre unfold. How can the world stand there and not try to do something to protect the men, women and children, to protect the neonatal ICUs where the babies are dying under the excuse we were not going to give them fuel because someone else is going to use that fuel. Let them suffocate, and that's okay. That's fine. That's a self-defense measure. I can't understand by which terms that people can think and justify genocide, justify killing children. And this, I thought, okay, I was traumatized, trying to console families where their children are dying, or where even there is some pile of flesh brought with a head or two on top of it from the Apache. And I'm trying to console the families crying all night because this is their father, this is the supplier, the one who works for them, or their brother or child. And then these atrocities will live with us forever. But again, they will not kill us because we are seeds. If they bury us, we will grow.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
I come to know that my experience was nothing. Whatever I went through was nothing to what all these doctors like Hammam Allah, Dr. Labad and all one of them, who has been working for the 16 or 17 years under siege with limited resources, working tirelessly, insufficient staffing, and God knows that they're doing everything they can to help their children. And they said that we will not leave our patients, we will not leave those people who are entrusted in their care. And they died doing that in the very moment. And they're worrying about their families whom they can't be with. And then the worst scenario when your son turns and being on the table for you to treat, or that they brought dead with barely any of them, everybody is recognizable. But you know what? They can try doing that. They can try wiping us from the memory of the world, but that will not happen. That will not happen, and we will stand together with all our fellow humans here in Australia, with Aboriginal population, with everywhere in the world, and we will not be silenced.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Gaza! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Gaza!
We'll round out here with Hidayah, who reminds us that knowing the details about what's happening in Gaza makes us responsible to do whatever we possibly can to disrupt it.
Thank you, Gaza, for teaching us about this immoral and greedy world. For teaching us that mainstream media is false and has been brainwashing people for years. For exposing every warmonger and war criminal that sits in government. For exposing the greed and hunger for other people's land and resources. For reminding us how we are all controlled by a few cruel and genocidal leaders and that there is no democracy. But thank you, Gaza, for teaching us resilience, for teaching us the principles of humanity, love, brotherhood, and so much more. The ongoing genocide in Palestine has taught us a lot about the current systems of power, not just in Israel, but in the USA, the UAE, Canada, France, Australia, and the list goes on. What is happening in Palestine is teaching us that an integrated system of oppression is rising against the fundamental value of human rights. It is teaching us that those in power do not for a second consider our liberty, nor our safety, or our right to life itself. We have been dismissed and in fact punished for condemning the brutal killing of innocent people. We have been threatened to be silent and not to speak out against the massacre that is happening in Gaza as we speak. This week, as we celebrate International Women's Day, I want to bring your attention to the unnatural crisis that is occurring in Gaza, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries that have been annihilated by these systems of oppression for years. In these countries, there are innocent civilians, women like me, children no different to the kids that have showed up to the protest today, that are in fear of their life because of the atrocities that our country has partaken in demolishing their homeland. What for? I ask myself. It was a stark reality when I came to understand that it is simply for economic gain, financial profit, increase in global control and power, the robbery of natural resources and the robbery of human lives. They say it's a political issue, a controversial discussion, a matter of terrorism, a complex warfare involving two equal nations, religious extremism, social barbarism, or as Israel likes to refer to it as the Arab problem. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to simplify it for you. It is nothing but a cold-blooded murder of innocent people in the name of colonialism.
Free, free Gaza!
Part of the purpose of this podcast series, beyond setting in place an archive of the struggle for justice here in so-called Brisbane, is also to work on building our collective understanding of what led to the current atrocities and how we might effectively challenge these regimes of violence everywhere they take root. To do this requires understanding that while the technologies and scale of the violence unfolding in Gaza is new, the broader logics of colonial occupation, of racial violence, of dehumanisation and dispossession have long histories. This is Jamal again.
While it's on a devastating scale that hasn't been seen in a very long time, this is nothing new in Palestine. This is just a continuation of the Israeli settler colonial project, which has fundamentally aimed, over a century ago, essentially, the Zionist movement began planning to colonize Palestine. This has always been their goal, to take as much land as possible with as few Palestinians as possible. Ethnically cleanse Palestinians from the land and take the land.
Israel is essentially, the state of Israel is about and was created to essentially have a Jewish majority demographic that displaces the indigenous Palestinian population. And so I think from this perspective, to put it very simply, that's why we would call it a settler colonial project, or, view it through that settler colonial lens. It is about a sort of slow, suffocating, and sometimes very explicit ethnic cleansing that is ultimately about replacing that indigenous population with an imported, so to speak, Jewish population. Of course, we know many who came as refugees from Europe during World War II, or as a result of the terrible horrors and the anti-Semitism there. But also, this was a project that was actually happening long before then.
That was Palestinian writer, lawyer and human rights activist Sarah Saleh explaining this dynamic and history of settler colonialism in Palestine in early 2023.
The ultimate goal of settler colonialism is about exterminating the indigenous population. And if you can't exterminate the indigenous population, you integrate them into society and you phase them out. And if you can't integrate them and phase them out, then you control them and you collectively punish them. So, to sort of diminish and erase them until they disappear in one way or another, which is what I meant by sort of a slow suffocation or strangling. And so we see that collective punishment and control, especially in Gaza and the West Bank, as, territories that are under Israeli military control and under the literal boot of Israeli soldiers. And for example, you see the integration, quote unquote, and the trying to assimilate Palestinians in greater so-called Israel, 1948, affording Palestinian citizenship, but then not allowing them to fully participate because they're basically second-class citizens who are discriminated against in so many ways. One only need to Google, Knesset and Israeli politicians and see the sort of bile that they spout against Palestinians and Palestinian politicians including, but also just the kind of obstacles that are put up, for Palestinians there. So I think for me, that is there's a really distinct, those are distinct strategies that are part of the settler colonial, Israeli settler colonial project, but no less important to highlight.
Of a young Urdu activist by the name Amir Aziz. He says, "It will be remembered, all of it will be remembered. Our loved ones lost to your butchery, their memories that leave our hearts in misery. With ink, your lies are written, be it with our blood, the truth too will be written. It will be remembered, all of it will be remembered. You shut down our streets in the light of day and seal our cities in the cold of night. Bearing hammers and guns, you sneak into our homes, break our heads, our limbs, and snatch our little ones. We will carve the evidence of your abuse onto these bones. It will be remembered, all of it will be remembered, the treacherous ways in which you conspired to steal our lands, as will be remembered the way we clenched onto it with these hands. When humanity reflects on a time of death and destruction, your actions will be remembered. When humanity reflects on a time of courage and resilience, our names will be remembered. Yes, indeed, our names will be remembered, that there were these mortal beings whose will could not be broken by iron hammers, sticks and stones, who smiled in the face of bullets, rifles, bombs, missiles and drones. Those who stood tall through the eye of the storm, the Shireens and the Qadrs. Our Shireens and our Qadrs and our Muhammad al-Durras who remain alive even after the news of their death was known. It will be remembered, all of it will be remembered. The eyes may forget how to blink, the earth forget how to spin, but it will be remembered, our flight with tethered wings, our raspy voice, our resistance. You lock us in prisons, we will etch freedom into its walls. Murder us, yes, murder us, we will come back as ghosts to write of your crimes. You write jokes inside courtrooms, you write jokes inside courtrooms, we will write justice on the streets outside. It will be remembered, all of it will be remembered. We will speak so loud that even the deaf will hear. We will write so clear that even the blind will see. Your writings like a black lotus, our writings like the beauty of red roses. You carpet bomb our homes, our schools and hospitals. You write injustice on these lands. It will be remembered, all of it will be remembered. So go ahead and write your injustice on these lands. Watch us, now watch us as we paint intifada on the skies.
We're going to round out this episode now with a special reading from Dr. Jamal Nabulsi, whose research and writing on Palestine really has shaped so much of our collective consciousness of the struggle here in so-called Brisbane. Interspersed with Jamal's reading, you'll hear from Rima and Malak with their reflections on the political processes that Jamal lays bare in this history.
My name's Jamal Nabulsi, and I am reading from my article, Writing the History of Palestine, which was published on the 2nd of June 2021 in Overland Literary Journal. In response to the 2021 Unity Intifada. Palestinian historian Rana Barakat states, given the erasure of the Palestinian from history, recalling Palestinian past is necessarily a simultaneous writing and writing of history. This history is not an abstract past for me. It fundamentally shapes who I am and where I write from. These connections form who I am as a diaspora Palestinian and what Palestine means to me. A land of loss and belonging, rupture and attachment, despair and conviction. It is also this history of dispossession and displacement that brings me to where I am today, living as a settler on the sovereign lands of the Yuggera and Turrbal peoples in so-called Australia. And it is through the struggle over my ambivalent position as settler here but indigenous to Palestine that I write this history. Pre-1948 Palestine. Although often used to refer to the devastating events of 1948, Palestinians understand the Nakba, or catastrophe, as an ongoing structure, not a singular event. Taking the Nakba as ongoing helps us to understand not only that the Nakba continues today, but that it began well before 1948. The catastrophic events of 1948 were preceded by decades of Zionist colonization. From its inception, Zionism openly saw itself as a form of European colonialism. For example, in discussing whether Argentina or Palestine should be the location of Zionist colonization, founder of the Zionist organization, Theodor Herzl, claimed the Jewish state in Palestine would be, quote, a portion of the rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism, end quote. Soon-to-be first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, made clear that this would entail the forced expulsion of the indigenous Palestinians. Quote, we must expel Arabs and take their place, end quote. This dispossession was founded on the fundamental myth that Palestine was supposedly a land without people for a people without land. Attributed to Israel Zangwill, a contemporary of Herzl in 1901, this phrase still forms the core of Zionist ideology towards Palestinians. It produces an ideological erasure of Palestinians, serving to justify their physical erasure from Palestine. The suggestion that there were no people in Palestine considering themselves Palestinians prior to Zionist settlement is, of course, false. Prior to Zionism, Palestinians had a multi-layered identity deeply rooted in the ancient past. At least by the end of the 7th century, Palestine became known as Palestine to the entire Islamic world, as much for its fertility and beauty as for its religious significance, and later to Europe with innumerable references to Palestine in European literature from the Middle Ages to the present. It is abundantly clear that there were a Palestinian people considering themselves sovereign on the land of Palestine for centuries before the onset of Zionist settlement. Palestinians expressed this sovereignty through their resistance to Zionist colonization, which began as soon as the intention of Zionist settlers to displace Palestinians became clear. At the outset of Zionist settlement in the late 19th century, when Palestinians saw these settlers instead as pilgrims or refugees, they extended characteristic Palestinian hospitality. Even Herzl himself noted the, quote, friendly attitude of the population to the first wave of Zionists. However, the response of Palestinians shifted dramatically once the Zionist intention to displace Palestinians became clear. As early as 1891, Palestinians began to protest to the Ottoman authorities, who then ruled Palestine, the increasing acquisition of land on the part of Zionist settlers from Europe. Palestinian resistance intensified after the official founding of the Zionist movement in 1897, when the settler colonial intentions of the Zionist European communities in Palestine became explicit. Throughout this resistance, Palestinians continued to make a clear distinction between their Jewish Palestinian neighbors with whom they had been living for centuries and the Zionist European Jewish settlers who had come with a clear intention to displace indigenous Palestinians. In 1901, Palestinians across several villages resisted Zionist land purchases through legal avenues and by harassing surveyors of the candidly named Jewish Colonization Association, who had come to measure their lands. Palestinian resistance continued to intensify with increasing settlement and displacement in the lead up to World War I. Palestinian fears of being displaced were further justified when Britain issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917 and with the onset of the British Mandate in Palestine. This declaration voiced clearly the intentions of Britain to aid the Zionist movement in its goal to form a settler nation-state in Palestine. The declaration proved crucial in providing both international legitimacy and material support to Zionist settlement. Palestinian resistance to the dual British Zionist colonialism was strident and continuous throughout the period of the British Mandate from 1920 to 1948. Large-scale riots and uprisings occurred in 1920, 1921, 1929, 1933, and culminating in the Great Revolt of 1936 to 1939, which comprised of a comprehensive civil disobedience strategy, massive protests, and a 6-month-long Palestine-wide strike. Palestinians never ceased laying claim to their lands that the British were appropriating as so-called state lands. This highlights the centrality of land in the Palestinian struggle. That this resistance was driven by Palestinian sovereignty with their land is clearly evident in the 3 demands that the Palestinian national movement at the time never failed to articulate. 1, the immediate halting of Zionist immigration. 2, a prohibition on the transfer of Palestinian land to Zionist settlers. And 3, the formation of a democratic government in Palestine. In the aftermath of World War II, the British resolved to withdraw from Palestine, transferring responsibility to the newly founded United Nations. The atrocious events of the Holocaust provided further moral legitimacy and a sense of urgency to the Zionist settler project. In fact, the UN saw the formation of a European Jewish settler colony in Palestine as a form of compensation for the Holocaust, or more accurately, a displacement of their associated responsibilities to the European Jewish people. This displacement was formalized in the UN Partition Plan of 1947, setting out 56% of historic Palestine for a Zionist state, who comprised less than a third of the population of Palestine at the time, and setting out 43% for a Palestinian state, with the city of Jerusalem being set out for an international regime. Given that the Zionist settlers made clear their intention to so-called transfer Palestinians from their land in Palestine, the combined effects of the UN Partition Plan and British withdrawal in 1948 were wholly predictable. The Zionist plan to transfer Palestinians was formulated well before the 1948 Nakba, when it was put into action. Transfer is a euphemism for ethnic cleansing. The ethnic cleansing of 1948 was planned out in great detail. In fact, Zionist so-called transfer committees were established from 1937, precisely to formulate detailed plans for how to cleanse Palestine of its indigenous Palestinian inhabitants. The 1948 Nakba. In what came to be known to Palestinians as the Nakba, the tactics used to carry out this ethnic cleansing included widespread massacres, systematic rape, and other terror-inducing tactics. Fahimi Zaidan, one witness who was 12 years old at the time, recalls hiding in her home with hers and another family when the Zionist militia blasted the door open. They shot an already injured man and, now I quote from her, "When one of his daughters screamed, they shot her too. They then called my brother Mahmoud and shot him in our presence. And when my mother screamed and bent over my brother, she was carrying my little sister Khadra, who was still being breastfed. They shot my mother too." End quote. Zionist soldiers who took part in such massacres described horrifying scenes. Babies with their skulls cracked open, the raping of women, and people being burned alive in their homes. These were not isolated excesses of war or the work of an extremist minority in the Zionist forces. They were clear patterns of action encouraged at every link in the chain of command. The primary goal of these operations was to expel Palestinians from the land, or at least from as large a part of Palestine as could be controlled. Zionist forces deliberately spread news of the massacres, rapes, and other atrocities to Palestinian towns and villages to coerce them to flee their homes in fear of suffering a similar fate. The result was that, in 1948, over 420 Palestinian towns and villages were destroyed, with at least 780,000 Palestinians being expelled from their homes. The Zionist forces controlled 78% of the land of Palestine, on which they would establish the State of Israel. For Palestinians, the 1948 Nakba was a total shattering of worlds. It was foundational in fragmenting the Palestinian community across the diaspora, 48 Palestine, and 67 Palestine. These terms are spatio-temporal markers of the two major stages of Israeli colonization in Palestine. 48 Palestine refers to the land that Zionist forces colonized in 1948, while 67 Palestine refers to the land that Israel occupied in 1967, the West Bank and Gaza. Both areas of 48 and 67 are recognized as Palestine, but as distinct zones of colonization with distinct present realities for Palestinian people living there. The ethnic cleansing of the Nakba directly created the first major Palestinian refugee population, which has since expanded due to further Israeli forced displacement, with 2/3, or 8.7 million, of the 13 million Palestinians worldwide being forcibly displaced persons currently. Whether they are in Gaza, the West Bank, neighboring countries like Jordan, Lebanon, or Syria, or further abroad, all Palestinian refugees are denied their fundamental right to return home. Those Palestinians who attempted to return to their homes in the years following 1948 were deemed infiltrators by Israel and were either expelled once again or simply shot on sight. Meanwhile, their villages were destroyed, their homes were plundered, and they were replaced on the land by Zionist settlers. Despite extensive ethnic cleansing in 1948, some 156,000 Palestinians managed to remain in 48 Palestine, the territory that became the State of Israel. Although they had survived the massacres and expulsions, they now came under an Israeli military rule that would last for almost 2 decades. During this time, they were forcibly displaced, incarcerated in prison camps, saw their land and property seized and their homes raided, and were harassed and abused throughout. These tactics were accompanied by legal and bureaucratic means of dispossession. For example, the seizure of Palestinian property was legalized through a variety of seemingly benign property laws. Palestinian population centers were spatially cut off from one another. Furthermore, Palestinian history was erased through, for example, the physical concealment of ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages, or more recently, in 2011, making the commemoration of the Palestinian Nakba illegal. 48 Palestinians, however, continue to resist such measures, asserting in myriad ways their identity and indigeneity as Palestinians.
My name is Rima. It's the Arabic word for spears. My family is from Jaffa. Both sides of the family are from Jaffa. My mom's family were displaced in 1948, and they were one of the very few who were able to gather some belongings and go straight to Jordan. My father's family were displaced first in 1948, became refugees in their own country. So they stayed in a refugee camp called Aqbat Jabal in Jericho. That's where my father was born. And then in 1967, they were displaced again when Israeli offense forces invaded the rest of historic Palestine, occupied it, and colonized it. They ended up in Jordan by sheer accident. They just hopped on a bus, my father and his siblings, all under the age of 15, and they managed to make it safe to Jordan. So all that was by accident. They didn't know where that bus was going. It just so happened that it took them to Jordan, where I was born. So fast forward to 1988, when I was born. I was brought up with many resistance lullabies. I think some of us here, Australians of Palestinian descent, would know those lullabies. Our lullabies are very, very different. And I was brought up with the stories from my family, stories about Palestinians, stories about refugees, that some of them inspire hope and some of them are just devastation. Then fast forward to 2023, here I am standing in front of you on a stolen land, on the land of the Jagaran Turrbal people, addressing thousands of people, on a land that my dead father and my dead grandfather and any of my family members have never made it to this land. But I'm just standing here to say it loudly, that we will never stop resisting. And I'm saying this because when Professor and poet Rifat, when he said, "If I must die,
You must live to tell my story. He knew that us Palestinians, we do not die. We do not die. We hand it over to the next generation. We Palestinians, he knew that we will live and we will resist it. We will resist and we will inspire until the last breath. We will resist until the last breath. We will resist. In our thousands, in our millions. In our thousands, in our millions. In our thousands, in our millions. In our thousands, in our millions.
The second great rupture in Palestinian history is the 1967 Nakba, or setback. Amidst mounting tensions between the states, Israel launched the Six-Day War against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, which resulted in an overwhelming Arab defeat and the Israeli occupation of the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula, Syrian Golan Heights, and the remaining area of Palestine, the West Bank and Gaza. The military occupation of the latter three territories continues today.
Israel has never hidden the fact that their goal is Greater Israel. They want Sinai, they want Jordan, they want Lebanon, they want Syria, they want Iraq, and they want Saudi. And we all know that Israel is America's proxy. Israel is Europe's proxy to the Mediterranean. When they say that they're evacuating Gazans in the south into Sinai, in 5-10 years they're going to say Hamas is in Sinai, we need to occupy Sinai. Then they're going to say Hezbollah is in Lebanon, we need to eradicate Hezbollah, they're going to take Lebanon. Then they're going to say the Axis in Syria, they're going to take Syria. They're going to keep using the colonial tactics that we're seeing right now as using Hamas as an excuse to eradicate Palestinians. They're going to do the same thing to the other Arab states.
Between 1948 and 1967, 3/4 of all Palestinians had been forcibly expelled from their homes. This also marked the beginning of the ongoing, devastating military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. In just the 4 years following 1967, over 17,500 Palestinian homes were blown up by Israel in the West Bank alone. Meanwhile, between 1967 and 1986, an average of 28,000 Palestinians left the West Bank and Gaza per year under Israeli policies of expulsion. This expulsion was accompanied by increasing Israeli settlement in the West Bank and Gaza, replacing the expelled Palestinians on their land, which continues to escalate in the West Bank today. East Jerusalem, an area of immense religious and political importance to Palestinians, was separated from the rest of the West Bank through its illegal annexation in 1967. However, Israel did not want the Palestinians native to East Jerusalem to become citizens of Israel and issued them with so-called permanent residency instead, a precarious legal status that has left them particularly vulnerable to forced expulsion. Between 1967 and 2015, Israel revoked the residency status of at least 14,400 Palestinian Jerusalemites, a form of bureaucratic expulsion from Palestine that tears Palestinian families apart. The 1967 Nakba confirmed to Palestinians that they had to take resistance to Israeli settler colonialism into their own hands. The Palestinian National Liberation Movement reconnected the sentiments of the Palestinian anti-colonial struggle with the actions of Palestinians themselves. In 1969, Palestinians took leadership of the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, with Yasser Arafat, leader of the most prominent political faction, Fatah, becoming the head of the organization. The success of the PLO in uniting Palestinians in anti-colonial resistance and gaining international attention is evident in their recognition as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people by the UN in 1974. In Arafat's 1974 address to the UN General Assembly, he famously announced, quote, "Today I have come bearing an olive branch and a freedom fighter's gun. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand." End quote. The First Intifada. As Israeli settler colonialism continued to escalate, Palestinian defiance mounted. This defiance came to a head in 1987 with the eruption of the First Intifada.
The Intifada was the outcome of at least 14 years of grassroots organising to create the necessary structures for mass mobilisation. The protests that set off the first Intifada broke out in Gaza before spreading to Nablus, Jerusalem, and before a week had passed, built to a general strike across 67 Palestine. Such massive popular protests and strikes were underpinned by a deep well of everyday practice. The Intifada became a way of living for Palestinians, with a vast range of practices of resistance permeating their everyday. They ran backyard farming schemes, promoting self-reliance and disengagement from the predatory Israeli market. When Israel closed schools and universities, teachers took classes in their homes and taught the politics of the Intifada. Palestinian women smuggled Intifada leaflets under their shirts, posing as pregnant, to conceal them from Israeli soldiers. Palestinian practices and symbols were reinvigorated, from national flags to art and cooking. The Oslo peace process. The first Intifada provided the impetus for the beginning of the Oslo peace process. This was a process of negotiations between the PLO and Israel, resulting in them signing the Oslo I and Oslo II Accords in 1993 and 1995, laying out the terms for their future negotiations. The ostensible goal of these negotiations was to realize a two-state solution, whereby an independent Palestinian nation-state would be founded alongside the State of Israel. An important outcome of the Accords was the creation of the Palestinian Authority, or PA, proposed as an interim government that would rule over Gaza and the West Bank until final status negotiations were completed. The Oslo Accords failed fundamentally in providing the foundations for a just peace. The fatal flaw of the Oslo process was that it not only disregarded but concealed the colonial power relations between Israel and indigenous Palestinians. What the peace process mounted to then was a pacification of Palestinian resistance while maintaining the conditions of settler colonial domination to which they were resisting. The formation of the PA shifted the goal of Palestinian politics from the liberation of Palestine to the achievement of statehood on a fragment of Palestine for a fragment of Palestinians. The institution of the PA, furthermore, created the illusion that Gaza and the West Bank were governed by Palestinians, even as Israel continued its violent dispossession of Palestinians and the expansion of Israeli settlement. Israel effectively used the peace negotiations as a curtain behind which it could intensify its colonization of Palestine. Between the signing of Oslo I in 1993 and the onset of the Second Intifada in 2000, the population in Israeli settlements in 67 Palestine almost doubled. Such settlement continues to be actively encouraged by the Israeli government through policies such as providing lucrative subsidies for settlement construction. Rather than a tragic failure of Oslo, this intensification of colonization should be seen as a fundamental part of the process. The Second Intifada erupted in 2000 out of the frustration of Palestinian hopes for peace. Like the First Intifada, the Second Intifada was a direct response to the escalation of Israeli settler colonialism. However, the Second Intifada differed from the first in many respects. In particular, it saw a decrease in popular participation and an increase in methods of armed struggle. Like the peace process to which it responded, the Second Intifada ultimately saw the further entrenchment of Israeli settler colonialism.
You're supporting genocide! You're supporting genocide!
The post-Oslo present. Palestinians continue to live and resist across the fragments of Palestine and outside in a presence that is defined by, quote, the farce of Oslo and its many sequels. The violent Israeli colonization of Palestine continues in many forms in this post-Oslo reality. There is the blatant disregard for Palestinian life, evident most disturbingly in the ongoing Israeli siege and brutal Israeli assaults on Gaza. This violence is underpinned by Israeli discourse. For example, during the 2008 assault, Israeli Deputy Minister of Defense Matan Vilnai threatened to punish Gaza with a, quote, Holocaust. The West Bank has become a key frontier zone for Israeli settler colonial land appropriation. The West Bank has been effectively divided into 227 separate enclaves, a strategy comparable to the Bantustans of apartheid South Africa, while totally isolating East Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank. This splintering of Palestinian space is effected in part through a massive 730-kilometre long wall that snakes through the West Bank well beyond the 1967 Green Line. The apartheid wall, as it is often known by Palestinians, cuts Palestinian cities and villages in two, separating farmers from their land and Palestinian communities from one another. The erasure and repression of 48 Palestinians continues. The violent Israeli response to protests across both 67 and 48 Palestine is testament to the fact that Israel sees all Palestinians as a threat to be eliminated, regardless of whether or not they carry an Israeli passport. Palestinians become a security threat to Israel simply by being born Palestinian. The millions of diaspora Palestinians continue to be denied their right to return home. Many of those in the near diaspora, particularly in Lebanon, continue to struggle through conditions of statelessness and the immense precarity entailed. I urge non-Palestinians then to know the cost when you hear our call to rise in solidarity with Palestine. Know that, for doing so, the physical ties to our homeland are severed by Israel. But the far deeper ties, those of an undying sovereignty with Palestine, only grow stronger.
My brothers and sisters, Malcolm X makes a remarkable statement. He says, we are not outnumbered, we are all out-organized. I look around today and I can see the pro-Palestinian movement is stronger than it ever was. I can sense that we are organized today better than we ever were. The apartheid Zionist occupying force know their time is up. This ruthlessness, this brute aggression that we see is a sign of their desperation. The end of their injustices is just around the corner. We are here because we believe this. We believe Palestine will be free. It is as clear as day to us. Never in the history of mankind has evil overpowered and oppressed. Never have lies overpowered the truth. Our scriptures say, وَقُلْ جَاءُ الْحَقَّ وَذَهَقَ الْبَاطِلِ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا, and declare the truth has come and the lies have vanished. Indeed, the lies are destined to be vanished. Today, as we continue to march through the streets, contain your anger, but channel your anger. Let your slogans, your chants, your voices, your storms shake the very foundation of this evil Zionism. I stand here year after year and ask the same question. Does your heart bleed for Palestine? Does your heart bleed for the children of Palestine? Then let your throats burn for Palestine, from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea.
You've been listening to the Justice for Palestine Magunjan podcast. As always, check the notes attached to this episode for suggestions on other material to listen to or engage with if you want to learn more. And feel free to reach out to us via our Substack if you want more information or to get involved with the struggle for Palestine here in so-called Brisbane. In the next episode, we'll be looking closer at Zionism and white supremacy and the origin of these formations to understand the deployment of claims of anti-Semitism as a means to silence critique of Israel's genocidal occupation of Palestine.
You've been listening to the Justice for Palestine Magunjan podcast.
Produced by the Radio Reversal Collective.
Huge thanks to 4ZZZ here in so-called Brisbane for providing the space and resources for us to pull together this series.
If you're interested in amplifying the struggle for justice for Palestine through your own platforms and you'd like to access the Justice for Palestine Magunjan audio archive, please let us know via our Substack, where you'll also find details about how to get involved in the struggle for Palestinian liberation right here in Magunjan.